The sound of shattering glass silenced the entire corridor. 11-year-old Tun stood frozen, his urine pooling at his feet, mixing with the shards of the broken flower vase. His small hands trembled as he stared at the pieces scattered across the polished floor of Oluwa Primary School. He had only been trying to reach the water dispenser. Just water. That was all. But now, death was coming. Death wore a green wrapper and gold earrings. Death had a name that made children wet themselves before the beating even began. Madame Kofo. Her footsteps echoed from the staff room, slow, deliberate, like a predator savoring the hunt. The other teachers fell silent. Even the headmaster, Mr. Adenuga, found urgent paperwork to attend to whenever that sound began. Tun's classmates had already scattered like roaches under sudden light. No one stayed to witness what was about to happen. Staying meant becoming the next victim. At Oluwa Primary School, survival was a solo sport. Who broke my vase? The voice slithered through the air, cold and venomous. Madame Kofo emerged from around the corner, her wrapper tied so tight it seemed to squeeze the compassion out of her body. Her face was a mask of barely contained rage, eyes narrowed into slits that could cut deeper than any cane. Tund opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His throat had closed entirely. I said. Madame Kofo's voice rose to a shriek that rattled the windows. Who broke my vase? Madam. I was just. The slap came so fast Tund didn't see it. He only felt the explosion of pain across his left cheek, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, and the floor rushing up to meet him. Just what? Madame Kofo loomed over him, her shadow swallowing him whole. Just being useless? Just being careless? Just being the worthless son of a worthless motorpark tout? Tun's tears came in hot, shameful streams. Around them, classroom doors remained firmly shut. Teachers who heard everything pretended to hear nothing. This was the way of things at Oluwa Primary School. Madam, please. Tund whispered, his voice barely audible. Please. Madame Kofo laughed, a sound like bones grinding. Did my vase say please before you destroyed it? Did your useless hands think before they touched what doesn't belong to you? She grabbed Tund by his collar, yanking him to his feet with surprising strength. The boy dangled like a puppet, his toes barely touching the ground. You will replace that vase, she hissed into his face, her breath hot and sour. 5,000 naira. By tomorrow. 5,000 naira. Tun's father earned barely 8,000 a month loading goods at Idamoto Market. 5,000 naira might as well have been 5 million. But madam, my father, we don't have. Then he should have raised a child with sense. Madame Kofo released him, letting him crumple to the floor. Now clean this mess. With your bare hands. I want to see blood if any glass cuts you. Maybe pain will teach you what your useless parents couldn't. If you're just joining us, welcome to TJ Stories, where African folktales meet real truth. This is a story that will shake you, change you, and remind you why some lessons are written in pain before they're written in wisdom. Hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. As Tun knelt on the floor, picking up glass with trembling fingers, Madame Kofo watched with satisfaction. This was her kingdom. She had ruled Oluwa Primary School for 7 years, and in those 7 years, she had perfected the art of breaking spirits. Children feared her more than they feared their parents. More than they feared failure. More than they feared anything in this world. And that was exactly how she liked it. The other pupils called her Aya Ogun, Mother of War. She wore the title like a crown. Every term, she selected her targets carefully, the poor children, the orphans, the ones whose parents couldn't fight back. She humiliated them in front of their classmates, destroyed their confidence, crushed their dreams beneath her heel like cockroaches. Why did she do it? Some said she was bitter because she never had children of her own. Others whispered that she had been beautiful once, before her fiancé left her at the altar for a younger woman. A few brave souls suggested she simply enjoyed the power, the godlike feeling of having small humans tremble at your approach. But no one said these things loudly. No one dared. The headmaster, Mr. Adenuga, protected her. Some said it was because Madame Kofo's uncle was a senator. Others claimed she had something on the headmaster, photographs, perhaps, or knowledge of missing school funds. Whatever the reason, she was untouchable. Parents who complained found their children mysteriously failing exams. Pupils who reported her cruelty discovered new levels of torture they hadn't imagined possible. The system wasn't broken at Oluwa Primary School. Madame Kofo was the system. By the time Tun finished cleaning, his hands were bleeding from 3 different cuts. Madame Kofo inspected his work with the critical eye of a prison warden. Useless, she spat. Just like your father. Just like your entire worthless bloodline. Now get out of my sight before I add interest to what you owe me. Tun fled, his vision blurred with tears and shame. Madame Kofo returned to her classroom, Primary 4B, where 38 pairs of eyes immediately dropped to their desks. The children sat rigid as mannequins, barely breathing. Mathematics, she announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Open your books to page 47. Chidinma, stand up. A small girl with cornrows rose shakily to her feet, her entire body vibrating with fear. Solve number 12. At the board. Now. Chidinma walked to the front like a prisoner approaching the gallows. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the chalk. The problem was simple multiplication, something she could do in her sleep, but under Madame Kofo's glare, her mind went completely blank. We're waiting, Madame Kofo said softly. Softly was worse than shouting. Softly meant she was savoring the moment before the strike. And madam, the answer is. Is what? Speak up. Or are you as brainless as you look? The classroom held its breath. That's when it happened. The door opened. No knock. No warning. Just the slow, steady swing of wood on hinges. Everyone turned. A child stood in the doorway, neither tall nor short, neither beautiful nor plain. But there was something about the way this child stood. Something in the eyes. Something that made the air in the room shift. Madame Kofo's irritation flared immediately. Who are you? And who gave you permission to enter my classroom without knocking? The child said nothing. Just stood there, looking at her with eyes that seemed older than they should be. Calm. Steady. Unafraid. I asked you a question. Madame Kofo's voice rose to its familiar shriek. The child blinked slowly, then spoke in a voice quiet as falling rain. My name is Sadiq. I'm your new student. Something cold slithered down Madame Kofo's spine. She couldn't explain it. This child looked ordinary enough, standard uniform, black shoes, simple hairstyle. But those eyes. Those eyes looked at her like they could see straight through her. Like they knew exactly what she was. New student, Madame Kofo repeated, recovering her composure. A slow smile spread across her face, the smile of a snake spotting a mouse. Well then, Sadiq. Welcome to my classroom. I have a feeling you and I are going to get to know each other very well. The other children exchanged terrified glances. They had seen this before. The way Madame Kofo smiled when she found fresh prey. But Sadiq simply nodded, walked calmly to an empty seat, and sat down. Never breaking eye contact. Never showing even a flicker of fear. And in that moment, though she didn't know it yet, Madame Kofo had just met the one student who would be her complete undoing. What happens when a bully finally meets someone who refuses to be broken? Drop a comment below, because this story is about to get intense. 3 days. That's how long Madame Kofo waited before she struck. She was strategic, you see. Calculated. She never attacked immediately, that would be too obvious, too easy to defend against. No, she preferred to let her victims settle in, let them breathe, let them think they might be safe. And then she would pounce. On the third day, during morning assembly, Madame Kofo's voice cut through the humid Lagos air like a machete through sugar cane. Sadiq. Step forward. The entire school froze. 600 pupils, 40 teachers, one headmaster, all held their breath. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The new student. The calm one. The one who didn't flinch. Everyone wanted to see how long that calmness would last. Sadiq walked forward from the primary 4B line, movements unhurried, face peaceful as still water. Madame Kofo circled the child like a vulture eyeing carrion. Class, this is what happens when children think they're special. When they think rules don't apply to them. She stopped directly in front of Sadiq. Your homework. Where is it? On your desk, madam. I submitted it yesterday afternoon. The response was polite. Respectful. Maddeningly calm. Madame Kofo's eye twitched. Don't lie to me, child. I checked my desk this morning. Nothing. I placed it in the red tray, madam. Top right corner of your desk. Under the attendance register. Several teachers shifted uncomfortably. They had seen Sadiq submit the homework. They had watched the child carefully place it exactly where described. But no one spoke. No one ever spoke. Are you calling me a liar? Madame Kofo's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper. The whisper that came before violence. No, madam. I'm telling you where I put my homework. The slap should have sent Sadiq sprawling. Madame Kofo put her full weight behind it, the sound echoing across the assembly ground like a gunshot. But Sadiq barely moved. The child's head turned slightly from the impact, then slowly, so slowly, turned back to face Madame Kofo. No tears. No trembling. No fear. Just those eyes. Looking. Seeing. Knowing. Get on your knees, Madame Kofo commanded, her voice shaking now with something that might have been rage. Or might have been something else entirely. Sadiq knelt. Raise your hands above your head. Sadiq complied. You will stay like this until I say otherwise. Under this sun. Until you learn respect. The assembly dismissed. Classes began. The morning sun climbed higher, hotter, merciless. But Sadiq remained kneeling, arms raised, face tilted slightly toward the sky. Not suffering. Almost, waiting. By noon, even the teachers were uncomfortable. Madame Kofo, Mr. Johnson, the young English teacher, ventured cautiously. The child has been there for 4 hours. Maybe you should mind your business, Madame Kofo snapped, though her eyes never left Sadiq's kneeling form. Or would you like to join? Mr. Johnson retreated. But something was wrong. Madame Kofo could feel it in her bones, in her blood, in the way her hands wouldn't stop trembling when she tried to mark papers. The child hadn't cried. Hadn't begged. Hadn't even asked for water. For hours under the Lagos sun, and Sadiq's arms remained raised as steady as palm trees. During lunch break, the other pupils gathered in clusters, whispering behind their hands. That child is not normal, Chidinma whispered to her friend Blessing. I heard the grandmother is a prayer warrior, Tund added, his voice low and urgent. My mother says she's the one who prays down demons at Mountain of Fire. No, another boy interrupted. My uncle says she's one of those old women who can see tomorrow like it's yesterday. Whatever she is, Blessing concluded, pulling her friends closer, that child is protected. You can see it. Madame Kofo can beat her from now till next year, nothing will happen. They didn't notice Madame Kofo standing in the doorway behind them, her face drained of color. Protected. The word slithered into her mind like a snake. No. Impossible. She didn't believe in such nonsense. She was educated. Modern. She had a teaching certificate from Lagos State College of Education. Superstition was for illiterate villagers, not for sophisticated women like herself. But then why wouldn't her hands stop shaking? Why did she feel cold despite the afternoon heat? Why did looking at Sadiq's calm face make her stomach twist with something that felt disturbingly like fear? At 2 p.m., the headmaster finally intervened. "Madam Kofo, please. The child has learned the lesson. Let them go to class." Madam Kofo wanted to refuse. Wanted to prove she was still in control. But her voice, her weapon, her power, seemed to have abandoned her. "Fine," she whispered hoarsely. "Sadiq, you may stand." Sadiq lowered their arms smoothly, rose to their feet without a single groan of pain, and looked directly at Madam Kofo. "Thank you, madam." Not sarcastic. Not bitter. Just calm. That night, Madam Kofo couldn't sleep. She kept seeing those eyes. That steady gaze that seemed to look past her skin, past her flesh, straight into the rotting core of who she really was. She told herself it was nothing. The child had just been lucky. Strong, maybe. But not special. Not protected. Just lucky. But luck runs out. Madam Kofo escalated. She made Sadiq clean the toilets with bare hands. The child did it without complaint. She tore up Sadiq's test paper, a perfect score, and marked it 0. The child accepted the grade silently. She had other pupils deliberately spill water on Sadiq's uniform. The child walked around wet until it dried, never once reporting who did it. She locked Sadiq in the storeroom during break time. The child emerged hours later, face serene, as if locked rooms were just another kind of classroom. Every punishment bounced off Sadiq like rain off waxed cloth. And with each failed attempt to break this child, Madam Kofo felt something inside herself beginning to crack instead. Her sleep grew worse. She started seeing shadows in corners. Hearing whispers in empty rooms. "You're losing your mind," she told her reflection one morning. But her reflection looked back with eyes full of doubt. The other pupils noticed the change too. Madam Kofo, who never forgot to punish, forgot to collect homework. Madam Kofo, who terrorized with her voice, sometimes stopped mid-sentence, staring at nothing. Madam Kofo, who fed on fear, was beginning to look afraid herself. "What's happening to her?" the children whispered. But they all knew. They had all seen it. You cannot pour darkness into light without the darkness disappearing. You cannot throw stones at a mountain and expect the mountain to crumble. And you cannot wage war against someone who has already surrendered everything to a power greater than fear. On Friday of the second week, during closing assembly, Madam Kofo's voice cracked mid-announcement. Actually cracked. Like broken glass. Like splintering wood. She tried to continue, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. The pupils stared in shock. Madam Kofo's hand flew to her throat, panic flooding her eyes. And there, in the third row of primary 4B, Sadiq stood watching her with those calm, knowing eyes. Not gloating. Not celebrating. Just watching. Waiting. As if knowing that what was beginning to unravel couldn't be stopped by any force on earth. The doctor found nothing wrong with Madam Kofo's throat. "Stress," he said, scribbling on his prescription pad. "You're overworking yourself. Take these tablets, rest your voice for a few days, and you'll be fine." But Madam Kofo knew better. This wasn't stress. This was something else. Something that had started the day that child, that cursed, strange child, had walked into her classroom. She didn't return to school for 3 days. And in those 3 days, Oluwa Primary School experienced something it hadn't felt in 7 years, peace. Children laughed during break time. Teachers smiled. The very air seemed lighter, cleaner, as if a dark cloud had temporarily lifted. But on the 4th day, Madam Kofo returned. Her voice was back. Stronger than ever. And she was done playing games. Monday morning, she marched straight to the headmaster's office, her wrapper tied so tight it looked like armor. "Mr. Adenuga, we need to talk about that child." "Sadiq." The headmaster looked up from his newspaper, eyebrows raised. What about the student? Something is wrong with that child. Very wrong. Madame Kofo leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I've been teaching for 15 years. I know children. That one is not normal. Mr. Adenuga sighed. He'd heard this song before. Every year, Madame Kofo found someone to target, someone to label as problematic. It was her pattern. Madame Kofo, the child has perfect attendance, submits all assignments on time, causes no trouble. Exactly. Madame Kofo slammed her palm on the desk. No child is that perfect. It's unnatural. I'm telling you, there's something spiritual about that child. The word hung in the air like smoke. Mr. Adenuga removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. Are you seriously suggesting we expel a student because they're too well-behaved? I'm suggesting, Madame Kofo said carefully, that we investigate the child's background. Call the guardian. Ask questions. Because I'm telling you, mark my words, that child is going to bring trouble to this school. Mr. Adenuga considered this. Truth be told, he'd noticed something odd himself. The way other pupils seemed drawn to Sadiq. The way the child's presence seemed to calm even the most unruly classrooms. Fine, he conceded. I'll call the guardian in for a meeting. Friday afternoon. Will that satisfy you? Madame Kofo smiled. Finally. Finally, she would expose this child for whatever they truly were. Friday is perfect. That same Monday afternoon, during break time, Sadiq did something that shocked everyone. The child approached Madame Kofo's desk. Voluntarily. Madam, Sadiq said quietly, may I speak with you? Madame Kofo looked up from her marking, suspicion flooding her features. What do you want? I want to apologize. The words fell like stones into still water. Madame Kofo's pen stopped moving. Apologize? For what? For making you uncomfortable, Sadiq continued, those calm eyes meeting hers without flinching. I can see that my presence troubles you. I don't want to be a source of distress. So I'm sorry. For a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, Madame Kofo felt something crack inside her chest. Something that might have been shame. Or guilt. Or the distant memory of the teacher she'd once dreamed of becoming before bitterness had poisoned her soul. But she crushed that feeling immediately. You think you're clever, don't you? She hissed. Playing innocent. Playing respectful. But I see through you, child. I see exactly what you are. What am I, madam? The question was simple. Honest. Without defense or challenge. And Madame Kofo realized with cold horror that she didn't have an answer. Get out of my sight, she whispered. Sadiq nodded respectfully and left. But outside the classroom door, something happened that changed everything. Tund was waiting there, tears streaming down his face, clutching a bloodied handkerchief to his mouth. What happened? Sadiq asked gently. My father. Tund sobbed. He sold our generator to pay for Madame Kofo's vase. But she says it's still not enough. She wants interest now. 2,000 more. We don't have it. We don't have anything left. Other pupils gathered around, their faces tight with shared pain. Each of them had their own story. Each of them bore scars, visible and invisible, from Madame Kofo's reign of terror. Sadiq listened to them all. Every story. Every wound. Every nightmare. And then the child said something that would echo through Oluwa Primary School for years to come. Don't worry. Everything is about to change. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the headmaster's office. Madame Kofo arrived early, dressed in her finest ankara, makeup perfect, confidence restored. She had prepared her case carefully. She would paint Sadiq as disruptive, manipulative, potentially dangerous. She would suggest the child needed psychological evaluation. She would win. At exactly 2 p.m., there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Mr. Adenuga called. The door opened. And Madame Kofo's world tilted on its axis. The woman who entered was not what she expected. She was old, perhaps 70, perhaps ageless. She wore a simple white buba and wrapper, her gray hair wrapped in a clean white scarf. Her feet were bare despite the school's tile floors. No makeup. No jewelry except a single wooden bracelet on her right wrist. But her presence filled the room like sunlight. This was Mama Sekinat, Sadiq's grandmother. "Good afternoon," she greeted, her voice soft but carrying the weight of mountains. She nodded respectfully to Mr. Adenuga, then turned to Madame Kofo. And smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. Or a mocking smile. It was something far more unsettling. It was a smile of recognition. The smile of someone who sees you completely. Every lie. Every cruelty. Every hidden sin. Madame Kofo felt naked under that gaze. "Please, sit," Mr. Adenuga gestured to the chairs. Mama Sekinat sat with the grace of royalty. Madame Kofo perched on her seat like a bird ready to flee. "Thank you for coming, Ma," Mr. Adenuga began. "We wanted to discuss." "I know why you called me," Mama Sekinat interrupted gently. "My grandchild has been different." "Yes?" "Different is putting it mildly," Madame Kofo found her voice, though it came out higher than intended. "Your grandchild shows no emotion. No fear. No normal reactions. It's concerning." "Concerning," Mama Sekinat repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me, Madam Teacher, what should a normal child's reaction be when they are beaten for no reason? When they are humiliated publicly? When they are punished for crimes they didn't commit?" The room went silent. Mr. Adenuga shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Madame Kofo's face drained of color. I don't know what you've been told, but... "My grandchild tells me everything," Mama Sekinat said simply. "The broken vase that wasn't broken by them. The homework that was submitted but declared missing. The 4 hours kneeling in the sun. The locked storage room." She paused, her eyes boring into Madame Kofo's soul. "Should I continue?" "Those were disciplinary measures," Madame Kofo stammered. "The child was disobedient. The child," Mama Sekinat's voice hardened like cooling steel, "has been nothing but respectful. Obedient. Kind. Even when cruelty was the only thing offered in return." She stood then, and despite her small frame, she seemed to tower over everyone in the room. "I raised Sadiq differently from other children," she continued. "I taught discipline, yes. But also dignity. I taught strength, but also gentleness. I taught my grandchild that when you meet wickedness, you don't become wicked in return. You become still. You become water that cannot be broken by stones." Madame Kofo wanted to speak, to defend herself, to attack, but her voice had abandoned her again. Mama Sekinat turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing," she said quietly, her back still turned. "I also taught my grandchild this. Those who dig pits for innocent children often fall into those pits themselves. Not by curse. Not by magic. But by the simple truth that cruelty always, always, devours its own master in the end." She turned then, and looked directly at Madame Kofo. "Your voice left you once already. A warning. But warnings are gifts that proud people rarely accept. So let me be clear, it's not my grandchild you should fear. It's the weight of your own actions finally coming home to rest." And with that, Mama Sekinat walked out, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Mr. Adenuga cleared his throat. "Madame Kofo, I think we need to have a different conversation. About teaching methods. But Madame Kofo wasn't listening. She was staring at her hands. They were shaking again. And deep in her chest, beneath the armor of her wrapper, beneath the makeup and pride and years of cultivated cruelty, something ancient and terrible was beginning to crack. The nightmares started that very night. Madame Kofo would fall asleep and immediately find herself standing in her classroom. But the classroom was wrong. The walls were melting. The desks were breathing. And all 38 of her pupils sat perfectly still, their faces blank, their eyes following her every movement. "Good morning, madam," they would chorus in perfect unison. And then they would smile. Not children's smiles. Something else. Something ancient and knowing and utterly terrifying. She would wake up screaming, her sheets soaked with sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But the real nightmare was waiting for her at school. Madame Kofo stood before her classroom, chalk in hand, ready to write the day's lesson on the board. She pressed the chalk to the blackboard. Nothing. She pressed harder. The chalk skittered across the surface, refusing to leave a mark. As if the board itself had rejected her. "Cheap chalk," she muttered, grabbing another piece. Same result. And another. And another. 5 pieces of chalk. 5 failures. Behind her, she heard it, a ripple of whispers, like wind through dry leaves. "Madam, are you okay?" Chidinma asked, her voice small but carrying an edge of something that might have been concern. Or might have been satisfaction. "Shut up." Madame Kofo snapped. Just open your textbooks. Page 53. Read silently." She retreated to her desk, her hands trembling so badly she had to sit on them to make it stop. This was ridiculous. Impossible. Chalk was chalk. Boards were boards. There was a logical explanation. There had to be. But logic was becoming a distant country Madame Kofo could no longer reach. During morning assembly, Madame Kofo stepped forward to lead the school pledge as she did every Tuesday. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. Not a whisper. Not a croak. Complete silence. She tried again, her throat working, her mouth forming the words, but it was as if someone had reached inside her and stolen her voice entirely. The pupils stared. The teachers shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Adenuga quickly stepped in. "Madame Kofo is saving her voice today. Mr. Johnson, please lead the pledge." But everyone saw it. Everyone knew. Madame Kofo's greatest weapon, her voice, her terror-inducing shriek, her power, had been taken from her again. And this time, she could feel it wasn't coming back easily. Madame Kofo was returning from the staff room when she heard laughter. Actual laughter. From her classroom. She stood outside the door, listening in disbelief. Her pupils, her terrorized, beaten down, perpetually frightened pupils, were laughing. Not the nervous titter of fear. Real laughter. The sound of joy she had systematically destroyed over 7 years. She burst through the door. The laughter stopped instantly. But the smiles didn't fade fast enough. They had been laughing. At her. About her. Because of her. Madame Kofo's vision blurred red. She wanted to scream, to rage, to remind them who she was, what she could do to them. But when she opened her mouth, only a thin, pitiful wheeze emerged. And then, God help her, one child giggled. Just one. A tiny sound, quickly stifled. But it was enough. The dam was broken. Within seconds, the entire class was laughing. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. Just, laughing. The way children laugh when they suddenly realize the monster under the bed was only ever a shadow. Madame Kofo stumbled backward, her hand clutching her throat, her eyes wide with horror. They weren't afraid anymore. Without her voice, without her power to terrorize, she was nothing. Just a woman in a green wrapper, growing old, growing irrelevant, growing small. She fled the classroom. For the first time in 7 years, Madame Kofo ran away from her own pupils. She didn't come to school. The headmaster called her phone 17 times. No answer. Madame Kofo sat in her small flat in Yaba, staring at the walls, her mind unraveling like cheap thread. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. She was educated. Sophisticated. She didn't believe in curses or spiritual attacks or any of that village nonsense. But then why was her voice gone? Why couldn't she sleep without seeing those blank faces, those knowing smiles? Why did she feel like something was crawling beneath her skin, eating her from the inside out? Her phone rang again. The headmaster. She rejected the call. She needed to think. To plan. To find a way to regain control. Because without control, without power, without fear, who was she? The answer stared back at her from the mirror across the room, nobody. Madame Kofo returned to school. But she was different. Her wrapper was loose, hastily tied. Her makeup was uneven. Her eyes had dark circles beneath them that no concealer could hide. She looked broken. Mr. Adenuga intercepted her before she could reach her classroom. Madame Kofo, we need to talk. Later, she croaked, her voice barely functional. Now, he insisted, his tone firmer than she'd ever heard it. My office. Please. In the office, she found she wasn't alone. Mrs. Okonkwo, the former PTA chairperson, sat in one of the chairs. Beside her was Tun's father, still wearing his loading clothes from Idamoto Market. And 3 other parents she recognized, parents of children she had targeted over the years. Her stomach dropped. Madame Kofo, Mr. Adenuga began carefully, these parents have come forward with concerns. Serious concerns about your teaching methods. Concerns? Madame Kofo's voice cracked. What concerns? Tun's father stood, his massive frame towering over her. But his voice was quiet. Controlled. More terrifying than any shout. You took 5,000 naira from me. For a vase my son didn't break. I sold our generator. In this Lagos heat. My wife is diabetic. She needs that generator for her insulin storage. But I sold it. Because you said my son was wicked. Because you said he needed to learn. That was a disciplinary. Let me finish, Tun's father said, and something in his voice made Madame Kofo's mouth snap shut. I went back to that school corridor. I asked questions. You know what I found out? Silence. The vase was already cracked. You were looking for someone to blame. And my son, poor, quiet, afraid, was convenient. Mrs. Okonkwo stood next. My daughter wet herself in your class. She was 7 years old. 7. You made her stand in front of everyone, in her soiled uniform, for 2 hours. Do you know she still has nightmares? Still wets the bed at 9 years old? One by one, the parents spoke. Story after story. Cruelty after cruelty. 7 years of systematic torture, carefully hidden, strategically denied. But not anymore. Madame Kofo wanted to defend herself, to explain, to justify. But her voice, that weapon she'd wielded for so long, was barely a whisper now. These are lies, she managed to rasp. Exaggerations. Children lie. Parents believe them. This is a conspiracy. Is it? Mr. Adenuga interrupted, and his voice was cold now. Cold in a way that told her everything had changed. Because I've started asking questions too, Madame Kofo. I've started looking into complaints that were filed and mysteriously disappeared. I've started wondering why so many children fail only in your class. Why so many parents withdrew their children and cited personal reasons when questioned. He stood, towering over her desk. I've been a coward, he admitted. I protected you because it was easier. Because you had connections. Because I was afraid. You should still be afraid, Madame Kofo hissed, finding a thread of her old venom. My uncle is a senator. One phone call. Your uncle, Mr. Adenuga interrupted quietly, died 3 months ago. I checked. The room spun. You've been using a dead man's name to terrorize me. To terrorize parents. To terrorize children. Madame Kofo's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. There will be a formal investigation, Mr. Adenuga continued. The school board. The Ministry of Education. Parents' testimonies. Everything. You can't do this to me, Madame Kofo whispered. I'm not doing anything to you, Mr. Adenuga replied. You did this to yourself. 7 years ago. Every slap. Every humiliation. Every cruelty. They've all been building to this moment. As Madame Kofo stood to leave, her legs barely supporting her, she looked out the office window. There, in the schoolyard, Sadiq stood beneath a mango tree, watching. Not celebrating. Not gloating. Just watching. With those calm, knowing eyes. And for the first time in her life, Madame Kofo understood what Mama Sekinat had meant. This wasn't a curse. This wasn't magic. This was simply the weight of her own actions, finally too heavy to carry. The pit she had been digging for 7 years was complete. And she was standing at its edge. They say what goes around comes around, but is this justice or revenge? Drop your answer below, because what happened next is going to leave you speechless. The investigation took exactly 7 days. 7 days that felt like 7 years to Madame Kofo. She was suspended pending the inquiry. Told to stay home. Told to prepare her defense. But how do you defend 7 years of documented cruelty? The school board interviewed 43 pupils. 27 parents. 12 teachers who had witnessed everything but said nothing out of fear. The stories they told painted a picture so horrifying that even the seasoned board members, people who had seen everything in Lagos public schools, sat in stunned silence. One mother testified that her daughter stopped speaking for 6 months after Madame Kofo told her she was too stupid to deserve a tongue. Another parent brought medical records showing their son had developed a stress-induced stutter that required therapy. A former pupil, now in secondary school, broke down while describing how Madame Kofo had cut off her hair in class as punishment for vanity. The evidence was overwhelming. Undeniable. Devastating. But Madame Kofo still believed she could win. The school hall was packed. Parents lined the walls. Teachers sat in rows. Pupils, current and former, filled every available space, their faces a mixture of fear, hope, and hunger for justice. At the front, behind a long table, sat the 5-member investigative board from the Lagos State Ministry of Education. And in the center of it all, alone at a small desk, sat Madame Kofo. She had dressed carefully. Her best ankara. Full makeup. Gold jewelry. The armor of respectability. But her hands, resting on the desk, trembled like leaves in a storm. The board chairman, Mr. Oluwa, a gray-haired man with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much, opened the proceedings. Madam Kahind Kofo Wurla, you stand accused of sustained physical and emotional abuse of minors in your care. Extortion. Falsification of academic records. And gross professional misconduct. How do you plead? Madame Kofo stood, her legs shaky but her voice, miraculously, returned for this moment. Not guilty, she declared. Everything I did was for discipline. For their own good. These children, these parents, they exaggerate. They lie. They want to destroy me because I demanded excellence. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Silence, please, Mr. Oluwa said calmly. Madame Kofo, we have testimony from 43 pupils. Are they all lying? Children lie when they're lazy. When they don't want to be held accountable. And the parents? The teachers? The medical records? Madame Kofo's prepared speech began to crumble. Those teachers are jealous. The parents are, they're trying to get compensation. This is all about money. Is it? Mr. Oluwa pulled out a document. We have records showing you collected over 200,000 naira in damages and fines over 3 years. Yet the school has no record of these payments. Where did that money go? The hall went silent. Madam Kofo's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No words came. Let me help you, Mr. Oluwa continued, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge of steel. It went into your personal account. We have bank statements. Would you like to explain? Those were legitimate, the school knew. The school knew nothing, Mr. Adenuga stood, his voice heavy with shame. Because I didn't ask questions. Because I was complicit in my silence. But I'm speaking now. He turned to address the room, his face drawn with guilt. For 7 years, I ignored complaints. I dismissed concerns. I protected Madam Kofo because it was convenient. Because I was afraid of confrontation. Because I failed in my duty as headmaster. Tears welled in his eyes. These children suffered because of my cowardice. And I will have to live with that for the rest of my life. The room erupted in whispers. Mr. Oluwa banged his gavel. Order. We will address administrative failures separately. Right now, we're focused on Madam Kofo. He looked directly at her. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Any explanation for the evidence against you? This was her moment. Her chance to save herself. Madam Kofo opened her mouth to speak, to spin a story, to shift blame, to do what she had done for 7 years, lie her way out of consequences. But something happened. Her voice stopped. Not like before. Not a raspy whisper or painful croak. This was different. Her throat worked. Her mouth moved. But absolutely no sound emerged. Complete. Total. Silence. She clutched her throat, panic flooding her eyes. The board members exchanged glances. Madam Kofo, Mr. Oluwa said slowly, are you claiming you cannot speak? She nodded frantically, pointing to her throat. How convenient, someone in the crowd muttered. Silence. Mr. Oluwa commanded. But even he looked skeptical. Then, from the back of the hall, a quiet voice spoke. May I say something? Everyone turned. Sadiq stood, small and composed, Mama Sekinat's hand resting gently on the child's shoulder. You may, Mr. Oluwa nodded. Sadiq walked slowly to the front, each step measured and calm. Madam Kofo, the child said softly, I forgive you. The words fell like stones into still water. Madam Kofo stared, her eyes wide with shock. I forgive you for the beatings. For the humiliation. For trying to break me. Sadiq's voice remained gentle, without anger or bitterness. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It just means I won't carry hatred in my heart. The child turned to the board. She needs help. Not just punishment. Something is broken inside her. Something that makes her hurt children to feel powerful. Until that's healed, punishment won't change anything. Mama Sekinat nodded with quiet pride. Mr. Oluwa looked at Sadiq for a long moment, then back at Madam Kofo. The child you tortured is showing you more grace than you ever showed anyone, he said quietly. I hope you understand the weight of that. He opened the official findings document. Based on the evidence presented, this board finds Madam Kahind Kofo Werla guilty of all charges. She is hereby dismissed from her position, effective immediately. Her teaching license is permanently revoked. She is banned from working with children in any capacity within Lagos State. Gasps and murmurs filled the hall. Furthermore, Mr. Oluwa continued, she is required to repay all illegally collected funds and will face potential criminal charges for extortion and child abuse. The police have been notified. Madam Kofo collapsed in her chair, her face buried in her hands. But even now, even in her moment of total defeat, she couldn't cry. Couldn't scream. Couldn't make a sound. The voice that had terrorized hundreds of children was gone. And in its absence, the truth had finally spoken louder than she ever could. Madame Kofo stumbled toward the school gate, her wrapper coming loose, her makeup streaked, her jewelry dull in the afternoon sun. Children and parents parted before her like the Red Sea, not out of fear anymore, but out of pity. She was no longer the terror of Oluwa Primary School. She was just a broken woman facing the consequences of her choices. At the gate, she paused and looked back one final time. Sadiq stood in the schoolyard, surrounded by other pupils who were laughing and playing freely for the first time in years. The child looked up, met her eyes, and did something unexpected. Sadiq waved. Not mockingly. Not cruelly. Just a wave. A simple gesture of acknowledgement. And in that moment, Madame Kofo understood something that shattered her completely. The child had never wanted to destroy her. Had never sought revenge. Had simply existed, calmly, truthfully, peacefully, and that alone had been enough to expose everything she had hidden for 7 years. You don't need magic to defeat cruelty. You just need to refuse to become cruel in return. Madame Kofo turned and walked through the gate. Behind her, for the first time in 7 years, Oluwa Primary School was filled with the sound of genuine laughter. Because 3 months later, something happened that no one expected. Something that would test everything Sadiq said about forgiveness. Something that would prove whether mercy could truly exist alongside justice. 3 months later. The woman who swept the floor at Mama Caro's buka in Mushin bore little resemblance to the Madame Kofo who once ruled Oluwa Primary School. Her wrapper was faded and patched. Her hands, once manicured and adorned with gold rings, were now rough and calloused from washing plates and scrubbing pots. Her face, without makeup, showed every year of her age and every weight of her guilt. She worked from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. for 8,000 naira a month. The same amount Tun's father had once earned. The same amount she had once considered worthless. Her voice had returned weeks after the hearing, weak and hoarse, but functional. Yet she rarely spoke. What was there to say? The police investigation had resulted in a fine she was still paying off in installments. The stolen money had been returned to every parent who could be traced. Her savings, gone. Her reputation, destroyed. Her teaching career, finished. She was 43 years old and starting life over as the lowest worker in a roadside restaurant. This was rock bottom. Or so she thought. Madame Kofo was scrubbing a particularly stubborn pot when she heard a familiar voice at the entrance. Good afternoon, Ma. We're looking for someone. She froze, her hands still in the soapy water. That voice. She knew that voice. Slowly, she turned. Mama Sekinat stood in the doorway, Sadiq beside her. Behind them were Tund, Chidinma, Blessing, and 5 other former pupils from Oluwa Primary School. Madame Kofo's heart stopped. They had found her. But why? For revenge? To humiliate her further? To spit on her now that she was down? She stood slowly, removing her hands from the water, unable to meet their eyes. We've been looking for you, Mama Sekinat said quietly. It took some time to find where you were working. Madame Kofo's voice came out as barely a whisper. What do you want from me? Haven't I lost enough? You've lost what you stole, Mama Sekinat replied calmly. But you haven't gained what you need. I don't understand. Sadiq stepped forward, holding a small envelope. We took a collection, the child explained. From pupils, parents, even some teachers. We raised money. Madame Kofo stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. Why? Because, Tun spoke up, his voice stronger than it had ever been in her classroom. Mama Sekinat taught us something. She said justice without mercy is just revenge. And revenge poisons everyone it touches. Chidinma added softly, we don't want to become like you were. Bitter. Angry. Hard. Blessing continued, so we decided to help. Not because you deserve it. But because we deserve to be free from hatred. Madame Kofo's legs buckled. She grabbed the counter for support, tears streaming down her face for the first time in years. I don't. She choked on the words. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve any kindness from you. From any of you. You're right, Mama Sekinat said simply. You don't deserve it. That's what makes it mercy. She placed the envelope on the counter. This is seed money. Enough to rent a small space and start a provision shop. Nothing big. Just enough to live with dignity. Why? Madame Kofo sobbed. Why would you do this for me? Mama Sekinat stepped closer, her eyes gentle but firm. Because I've seen two types of people in my life. Those who are broken and become bitter, spreading their pain to everyone around them. And those who are broken and choose to heal, even when it's hard. Even when they don't deserve help. She paused, letting her words sink in. You have a choice to make, Madame Kofo. You can take this help and remain the same person, bitter, resentful, blaming everyone but yourself. Or you can take this help and become someone new. Someone who understands that power without compassion is just cruelty in disguise. Madame Kofo looked at each child's face. These faces she had terrorized. These souls she had tried to break. And they were offering her a lifeline. Not because she earned it. But because they chose mercy over vengeance. She fell to her knees right there in the buka, her sobs shaking her entire body. I'm sorry, she whispered through her tears. I'm so sorry. I was wicked. I was cruel. I hurt you because I was hurting inside and I didn't know how to stop. Sadiq knelt beside her, placing a small hand on her shoulder. The first step to healing is truth, the child said softly. You just took it. Madame Kofo's small provision shop in Bariga was nothing fancy. Just a wooden kiosk selling rice, beans, soap, and provisions. But it was honest work. Clean work. Work that didn't require crushing anyone's spirit. She lived simply now. Quietly. She attended a small church where she sat in the back row and prayed for forgiveness she still wasn't sure she deserved. Every Friday, she volunteered at a children's literacy center, helping pupils who struggled with reading. She never raised her voice. Never lifted a hand. If a child made a mistake, she would smile gently and say, let's try again together. The transformation wasn't instant. Some days, the old bitterness crept back. The old anger. The old desire to blame everyone else for her downfall. But on those days, she would look at the envelope, now empty but kept as a reminder, and remember that children she had tortured had chosen to save her. And she would choose, once again, to be worthy of that mercy. On a Sunday afternoon, Sadiq visited the shop with Mama Sekinat to buy rice for the week. Madame Kofo measured it carefully, added a little extra as she always did for them, and tied the bag. Thank you, Sadiq said with that same calm smile. No, Madame Kofo replied, her voice steady now, full of quiet strength. Thank you. For showing me that redemption is possible. Even for someone like me. As they walked away, Mama Sekinat squeezed her grandchild's hand. You did well, Omo-mi. You chose light over darkness. Peace over revenge. Sadiq looked back at the small shop, at the woman who was slowly becoming someone new. Grandma, the child asked thoughtfully, do you think people can really change? Mama Sekinat smiled, her eyes wise and warm. Change is like planting a seed, my child. The seed doesn't become a tree overnight. But with time, patience, and the right soil, even the hardest seed can grow into something beautiful. She looked at Madame Kofo through the shop window, seeing not the monster she had been, but the human she was becoming. And sometimes, Mama Sekinat added softly, the right soil is mercy. Authority without compassion is cruelty in disguise. But cruelty met with mercy can become the soil where transformation grows. Justice holds people accountable. Mercy gives them a chance to become someone better. And wisdom knows when to offer both. Have you ever had the power to destroy someone who hurt you, but chose mercy instead? Or are you still carrying that pain, letting it poison you from within? This story is your reminder. Revenge might feel sweet, but mercy sets you free. If this story touched you, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear this today. Someone is choosing between bitterness and healing right now. Be the reason they choose light. And if you love this African folktale with a powerful message, subscribe to TJ Stories. We bring you tales that don't just entertain, they transform. Drop a comment, mercy or revenge? Let's talk about it. See you in the next story. And remember, the pit you dig for others might be the one you fall into. Choose wisely.